The movie begins by showing Texas, United States in 1934, where the harsh punishment of convict labor was being carried out in the forests. One day, as the guards were distracted, a cunning prisoner handed a gun to his accomplice. The prisoners had been secretly plotting their escape. As the sun beat down on the forest, a flashy red car pulled up, driven by Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. The notorious couple had come to aid in the escape, their latest criminal endeavor. With everything in place, the daring escape plan was put into action. The news of Bonnie and Clyde's latest criminal act, aiding in the escape of 3 convicts, caused a stir in the city. At an emergency meeting, the governor voiced his frustration over the police's inability to capture the notorious fugitives. The warden stepped in, revealing that Bonnie and Clyde were not ordinary criminals, but highly connected fugitives with numerous criminal connections across America. In order to bring an end to their reign of terror, the warden suggested they bring in Frank Hamer, a former Texas Ranger and expert in hunting down fugitives. With his experience and reputation, the warden was confident that Frank could bring Bonnie and Clyde to justice. The governor was initially hesitant to agree to the plan, as the thought of the police resorting to hiring a street cowboy to solve the case would bring shame to his reputation if it were to be made public. Despite his reservations, the governor was eventually persuaded to proceed with the plan, under the assurance that the operation would be kept confidential to protect his image. In the afternoon, the warden paid a visit to Frank's home, delivering the governor's offer to hunt down Bonnie and Clyde. Frank was torn. On one hand, eager to accept the challenge. On the other, he had promised his wife to never take on dangerous work again. Just as Frank was struggling with his dilemma, his wife arrived home. When the warden asked for her approval to carry out the mission, she flew into a rage and chased him away. Days passed and Frank couldn't stop thinking about the mission offer. Every time he turned on the radio, he was bombarded with reports of Bonnie and Clyde's crimes. As a retired cowboy who had hunted fugitives for years, Frank felt a moral obligation to take on this final mission. He began to test his shooting skills, just to see if he was still up to the task. Seeing her husband's depression and resolve, Frank's wife reluctantly agreed to let him take on the mission, on the condition that he promised to return home safely. Frank quickly made his way to the warden, eager to gather all the information and case files he needed on Bonnie and Clyde. Armed with the details, Frank set off on his mission. On the way, he considered reaching out to his former comrade, a fellow Texas cowboy named Maney Gault. However, upon seeing Maney playing with his grandson, Frank realized that Maney had moved on and was living a peaceful, happy life. Frank didn't want to drag Maney back into the dangerous world, so he abandoned the idea and continued on his own. Unbeknownst to Frank, Maney had already been alerted to his arrival. Frank had just acquired some weapons and stepped out of the store when he was met by an old acquaintance, Maney. Maney told Frank that he had seen him at his house earlier and was hoping for an invitation to join forces once again. Maney was feeling down, as his life had taken a turn for the worse. He was in debt, unemployed, and now spent his days taking care of his grandchildren. Despite his initial hesitance, Frank decided to offer Maney the job he so desperately wanted. The 2 former Texas cowboys were now on a mission to catch the notorious criminals, Bonnie and Clyde. Meanwhile, a cattle rancher was going about his daily routine of milking his cows when he was suddenly witnessing Bonnie and Clyde's brutal murder of the police officers outside his cage. The sight left him stunned. Determined to catch Bonnie and Clyde, Frank and Maney headed to the woods where the pair was last seen. Despite a thorough search, they were unable to find any clues to their whereabouts. Maney, eager to prove his worth, fired his gun at a board, but to no avail. Frank then stepped in, demonstrating the proper technique for shooting. The 2 cowboys set up camp for the night, but the following morning, they received news of Bonnie and Clyde's latest crime, the murder of several police officers. With a sense of urgency, Frank hastened to the scene of the crime. Upon arrival at the crime scene, Frank and Maney were met with resistance from the police, who looked down on their cowboy backgrounds. However, Frank's special assignment letter granted him access to the investigation. Utilizing his decades of experience hunting fugitives, Frank conducted a thorough examination of the area, uncovering evidence that left the police stunned. Despite their initial skepticism, the police were impressed by Frank's attention to detail and ability to find hidden clues. With a lead on Bonnie and Clyde's whereabouts, Frank and Maney set out for the city in question. Along the way, they made a stop to refuel their vehicle, and Frank took the opportunity to ask the gas station attendant if he had seen the criminals pass by. To their surprise, the attendant revealed that Bonnie and Clyde were seen as heroes by the working-class people, who were fed up with the wealthy and banks that treated them like loan sharks, suffocating them with debt and high interest rates. Frank was taken aback by the gas station attendant's words, who saw Bonnie and Clyde as symbols of resistance for the working class and Robin Hood-like figures. Outraged, Frank lashed out and beat the attendant, pointing out that their actions resulted in the death of a police officer, leaving his wife and son to struggle and beg for food to survive. However, the beating had the unintended consequence of forcing the gas station attendant to reveal the information Frank sought. He disclosed that Bonnie and Clyde had indeed passed through the area and even showed the direction in which they were headed. Armed with this new information, Frank and Maney continued their pursuit of the notorious criminals. As Frank and Maney journeyed on, they stumbled upon a slum. Frank was shocked to see the poverty that still existed in such a wealthy nation, with people resorting to bartering for goods and food. The country was then suffering from a major economic crisis, and Frank saw how the wealthy were self-absorbed and indifferent to the struggles of the poor, many of whom were struggling with starvation. It was in this context that Frank began to understand why Bonnie and Clyde were seen as heroes by some. They not only stole for their own gain, but they also distributed the loot to those in need, providing some relief in a time of great hardship. Arriving in the city where Bonnie and Clyde were rumored to be, Frank and Maney stopped for lunch. As Maney went to relieve himself, the couple's car suddenly drove by. Maney, eager to take the opportunity, drew his gun, but was hindered by a crowd of fans who had come to ask for autographs. With many people obstructing his shot, Maney was unable to take a shot. He quickly informed Frank and they set out in pursuit of Bonnie and Clyde, but unfortunately, the couple managed to escape. Frank and Maney went to a bar one night after receiving information that one of the three escaped inmates, Wayne, was there. Frank attempted to interrogate Wayne about the whereabouts of the notorious outlaw duo Bonnie and Clyde, while Maney went to the bathroom. However, in the bathroom, Maney was approached by a group of Bonnie and Clyde admirers who underestimated him, taunting him that he was too old to capture their idol. Although Maney tried to remain patient at first, their arrogance eventually got the best of him. Meanwhile, outside the bathroom, Frank was relentless in his questioning of Wayne. Fearing arrest and the prospect of returning to jail, Wayne finally broke down and revealed that Bonnie was going to visit her mother the following day. With this crucial information in hand, Frank and Maney left the bar. The next day, Frank and Maney kept watch over Bonnie's mother's house. As they were monitoring the area, they saw the driver of Bonnie's car throw a bottle with a secret coded letter towards the house. However, before Frank could retrieve the bottle, a young boy came running with it in hand. Despite the challenge, Frank successfully obtained the bottle and found a message inside that simply said goodbye in a green field. That night, Frank and Maney intended to question Wayne about the message they had found. However, upon entering his house, they were horrified to find that Wayne had died a terrible death. Given the circumstances, they were certain that Bonnie and Clyde were responsible for Wayne's death because he had given them information. The sight of Wayne's lifeless body filled Frank and Maney with guilt, as they realized that if they hadn't approached Wayne, he may still be alive. Despite Wayne's status as an escaped prisoner, they felt that he was too young to die and still had a chance to turn his life around. In the midst of their grief, Frank declared that they must act quickly to stop Bonnie and Clyde from causing any more harm to others. The following day, Frank called the warden to report Wayne's death. After making the report, Maney told Frank that he believed there was a clue in the message they received from the bottle the previous day. After some investigation, they finally uncovered the answer to where Bonnie and Clyde were headed next, the home of one of the escaped convicts, Ivy Methvin. Frank and Maney then made their way to the police station in Ivy's hometown. At the police station, Frank and Maney presented a letter of appointment from the governor and explained their plan to apprehend Bonnie and Clyde to the police. They asked for assistance in making the arrest. The group then visited Ivy's father and informed him that his son was a fugitive. Frank, Maney, and the police threatened Ivy's father with severe punishment for his son's crimes but also offered a deal. If he agreed to help them capture Bonnie and Clyde, they would clear Ivy's name from the list of fugitives. After hearing the proposal, Ivy's father agreed to help, but only on the condition that the police ensured the safety of his son. He didn't want his son to meet the same tragic end as Wayne simply for speaking out. He also revealed to Frank that Bonnie and Clyde had planned to visit his house the following afternoon for a temporary stay. Upon receiving this information, Frank then went on to explain the details of the trap they had devised. The next day, Frank, Maney, and the police officers lay in wait at the trap site. Ivy's father was instructed to stand beside his truck, pretending to need help changing a flat tire. Frank believed that when Bonnie and Clyde came across Ivy's father, they would stop to assist him. Despite their criminal activities, Frank still considered Bonnie and Clyde to be fundamentally good people. If they stopped to help, Frank, Maney, and the police would emerge from hiding and shoot the two dangerous criminals dead. After waiting for hours in the intense heat, Frank and Maney were becoming restless. The ticking of the clock, the rustling of the leaves, and every little sound seemed to amplify the tension as they prepared to face two of the most dangerous criminal couples in the country. At last, Bonnie and Clyde arrived. In an instant, they were shot dead on the spot. The police took their car and bodies to the station, while Bonnie and Clyde's admirers wept hysterically at the loss of their hero. As the credits began to roll on the screen, Frank and Maney remained silent, unsure of how to process the events they had just witnessed. They were torn between feeling joy at a job well done and sadness at the loss of a beloved hero. Suddenly, a reporter approached them, eager for an interview and offering a hefty sum of $1,000 for their time. Frank quickly turned and walked away without a word, leaving Maney to answer the reporter's questions. Maney explained that even though they had accomplished their final mission, it was a bittersweet victory. The death of a beloved hero left a hole in the hearts of the community and weighed heavily on Frank and Maney. The moral of the film is that life is not black and white and that people are complex and have multiple facets to their personalities. The concept of good and evil is subjective and varies based on different perspectives and experiences. This highlights the importance of empathy and understanding and shows that sometimes the line between good and evil is blurred.